Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Energy Impacts Podcast with David Blackman. I am obviously your host, David Blackman, the guy with the cap on, because my hair's a mess today, what little I have left. With me today is one of our favorite people, great American, president of the U.S. Oil and Gas Association in Washington, D.C., Tim Stewart. How are you, my man?
David, it is good to be with you. It's been too long. We should be doing this more often, but it's great to spend time with you this morning.
Yeah, we definitely should be doing it more often. And I apologize for letting so much time go in between here. I'll get better about it. There's so much happening in Washington. I'll be calling you every dadgum week.
Yeah, it's been a busy time. So
Yeah, and so here we are. It's let's see, July 15th. We are. Oh my God, are we just 8 days down the road? No. We're. What day did the thing pass on
yeah,
July
it's
4th?
it's pretty much a week out, you know.
Yeah,
So
11
past,
days.
yeah, yeah,
Since the One Big Beautiful Bill Act was signed into law by President Donald Trump on July 4th, Independence Day, it had a ton of content related to energy and the oil and gas industry specifically, but also all other forms of energy and subsidies for them. And so we're going to, nobody knows better about what is and isn't in that bill that I know than Tim does. And so I wanted to have this discussion with you. I really appreciate you taking the time to do it. I have my own opinions about the stuff that was in there and how impactful it's going to be, but I wonder just from your perspective and the perspective of your members, which is kind of the spectrum of oil and gas producers in the United States, from those little guys to the big guys. How impactful is this going to be on the industry, and is it going to help spur some more drilling and really, I think what's more important is more infrastructure being built in the country right now to move oil and gas. How impactful is this going to be?
yeah. That's a great question. I think we're all trying to absorb this right now. My initial thoughts are, Washington operates off an interesting two type of scenarios here, which is if you're not part of the solution, you make all your money in prolonging a problem, right? And that's just the touch and go of DC, the give and take, so to speak. Second thing we always have to remind ourselves, David, is that Congress is really good at doing nothing until it's time to come to completely overreact, and then they do that. Um, so a couple thoughts. I mean, one, from the U.S. Oil and Gas Association, we're very, very happy with this because while it is not a full loaf, it is certainly at least a half loaf, if not a bit more, and we can make some great sandwiches out of this thing. And there's nothing that precludes us from going back and baking another loaf of bread. In fact, Congress is already talking about that right
Yeah,
now. Yeah, that's the irony of the whole
talking
thing.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah, the irony of this whole thing is literally within probably 72 hours, I was back on the Hill in other meetings, and the conversation was, okay, now we got to go back and finish this in reconciliation part 2. What this does is some really important things for our industry, David, which is one, it sort of returns us back to normal. It's not that particularly seismic in terms of what are in there, because most of what we have in there was basically a return to how things were 4 years ago, 8 years ago, 12 years ago. It's sort of a normal
Right.
standard energy policy in the United States. It goes to show exactly how off kilter we were over the last 4 years under the Biden administration, when this seems groundbreaking, that holding quarterly lease sales is groundbreaking. It's not. It's how things used to be. The other
Well, it's
thing that
how things are statutorily supposed to be, right? Where the
exactly,
leasing is concerned.
yeah, and that's a great point. I was going to say that the final thing is when you live if you live by executive order, you die by executive order. And what Trump has done, the Trump administration did in the first 3 months of their administration, was they sort of reset the table by executive order.
Yeah.
But the one big bill actually puts it back into statute, and that's really key. And so the overall benefit from all this is a fair amount of certainty that we can go forward, particularly on the federal leasing program.
Yeah. In fact, I saw a list yesterday of all the various energy related Trump orders that were put into statute, language in this bill. helps put into statute and make permanent. And that's a really important aspect of all of it. There's also quite a lot in there, or some in there, and probably not enough, but about streamlining permitting and kind of memorializing some of his executive orders around permitting and streamlining that in there. But there's a lot more that remains to be done on that front, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. And again, sort of, I think the House provisions were aspirational for sure.
Yeah.
A lot of those NEPA streamlining provisions, which really would have made our industry's life much easier and certainly provide more stability, just didn't survive the bird bath. And that's a whole other conversation about the parliamentarian process in the Senate. But with that in mind, that's why Congress is now talking about a permitting reform bill. It's really interesting, not to get too far down the road right now, but some of those provisions that were in there, which required for you to qualify for the renewable tax provisions, the renewable credits in there, need to be under construction by 2027.
Yeah,
I don't know if your listeners have followed that or not, but that's the restructuring. All of a sudden, what that does is that puts incredible pressure upon any developer who's doing a renewable project to get his project permitted and under construction. And this is going to be a fascinating Baptist and bootlegger coalition that's going to come up between the oil and gas industry and the renewables on permitting reform. And I've been mentioning that to some folks, and like, you're absolutely right. So that's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out.
Really is. And I'm interviewing Emily Dominich, who I think is Ben Dominich's sister, right?
Yeah.
Who's heading up the administration's streamlining permitting task force over there at the Department of, I think it's housed at Energy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or is it Interior?
Yeah.
Energy, yeah. I'm interviewing her Friday, so we'll get some more details, her thoughts on that as well Friday. But yeah, the whole wind and solar thing, I mean, there's a lot of critics out there of that language that think that it's really too liberal and isn't going to really resolve the issue and it leaves things too wide open. I have a different view on that. I think it's going to cause all these financial institutions, private equity funds that have been funding so many of those projects to take a step back and say, well, do I really want to risk billions of dollars on these two industries when we think these subsidies are going away and their business models really aren't sustainable without the subsidies? And I just think we're going to see a big capital flight out of those industries, and it's going to put more. Well, first of all, what do you think about that? I mean, do you think that'll be a consequence of this?
I do. I think you're exactly right. In an era of cheap money like we lived through for the last 6 or 8 years, it didn't matter if a project penciled out, because honestly, I do think a lot of that investment was never about actually producing energy. It was actually about being able to either tax avoidance or just make your money out of the tax credits versus anything else.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter because you could capitalize that at a very, very low rate. Now, when you're looking at 6 or 7% capitalization and the tax credit goes away, a lot of those projects simply don't make sense.
Right.
I think you're going to probably see some significant flight of capital out of the industry unless they can get these projects qualified under the current tax credit regimen prior to 2027. Again, I got to be careful. Dave, I try not to bash my renewable friends.
Sure. Yeah.
Because you and I both know we need more of everything right now. Our economy is growing. We've got to have a reliable multi-stream source of energy for us.
Yeah.
We can get into the AI and the data center thing, but you cannot have, you'll never win the AI race with weather dependent energy resources, So to your earlier point, I do think, look, it's probably going to restructure the capital markets a little bit. It's going to be pretty interesting to see what happens.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's relevant to oil and gas because if there is a lot of capital flight out of wind and solar as a result of this, and I just got an Enverus study indicating that's going to be the case in a pretty significant way that I'm going to write about tomorrow. It's going to put more pressure, in my view, on natural gas to, really be ready to expand. We got to have the supply. We have to have the infrastructure to get more gas to more natural gas power plants that were already being planned to come online because of AI and data centers to power them, at least in the near term. And I just think if you're not going to have all the anticipated new capacity for, you'll have a portion of it, but not all that's been anticipated from wind and solar, then that just puts additional pressure on the natural gas industry to expand and be able to perform.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, what you're hearing, what your thoughts are on that.
We're living in an incredibly disruptive time in a good way, and this goes to everything. I mean, this goes from the administration, where I've repeated this line over and over to you. It's like, this is not a Republican administration. This is a disruptive administration.
Yeah. It's a great line. I wish I'd have thought of it.
Well, thank you. And you cannot bring a Republican playbook to this administration, because they're not Republicans, they're disruptors. And you see that across the board. And it's interesting from our industry. I mentioned the Baptist bootlegger coalition between renewables and oil and gas that may crop up. There's one that's underway right now, which is between oil and particularly natural gas and the crypto bros and the big data guys. They realized about a year ago they cannot get from here to there.
Yeah.
One of the great, I use this all the time, which is in this disruptive environment, the old model, the utility model, is not going to play anymore. You're going to have 1,000 microgrids crop up, because the old model, the utilities cannot meet the demand. And behind the meter, so to speak, these microgrids are going to be driven by natural gas, which means our industry has to innovate on a couple of things, both on the production, but also the delivery mechanism, and then the end utilization. One of the coolest things, and I suggest you probably get these guys on your podcast at some point, is talk to the VoltaGrid guys. I don't know if you're familiar with them or not, but
No.
Real quick for the listeners, VoltaGrid is a company that is probably one of the largest power producers in the United States right now, because they have the behind the meter off-grid microgrid generation capacity using mobile natural gas turbines.
Okay.
VoltaGrid, David, is, for all intents and purposes, is a spinoff out of Halliburton. Halliburton 5 years ago, when the Biden administration was putting pressure on and ESG and those things, Halliburton made the concerted effort to move their fracking fleets, the new fracking fleets, from diesel to natural gas, and they invested in a small company called VoltaGrid. VoltaGrid's gone from $5 million to, it's going to be over $4 billion this year in 3.5 years, based on what they do, which is providing electricity via natural gas.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating story. But it just goes to show that, one, it's disruptive, but it's also innovative coming out of the industry. And to your point, which is natural gas is going to be, I think, probably the belle of the ball here in the next 5 years, as we do this AI race to China to beat them at their own game. So it's an exciting time to be in. And back to the big, beautiful bill, it sort of helps expedite our ability to produce, which is going to be great.
So natural gas being the belle of the ball, there's always been these critics, and they're still out there. 15 years ago, it was mainly from the chemical companies who wanted all that natural gas to stay very cheap for themselves.
Yeah.
But now it comes as much from the climate change community as anywhere else, that using all this natural gas, the more demand we create for natural gas, the prices go higher, and we don't have enough supply to prevent that from happening. That's really a complete myth. I mean, you would think everyone would understand how much of a myth that really is. Talk about the magnitude, the real magnitude of the natural gas resource in this country, and why prices continue to remain very low in spite of the LNG exports, for example.
Yeah, it's fascinating if you think about it. You and I probably could sit down and show that the price of natural gas is exactly the same as it was 15 or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And the reason being is because, one, we're just very, very good at finding at what we do. However, 20 years ago, you didn't want to find gas. You wanted to find liquids when you went out, right? But now I think the resource, the new markets for the resources sort of changed all of that. And the infrastructure has slowly been built up, where rather than flaring, you can actually get it out and ship it off to a market. I was talking to I was talking to the congressional staff last week. We were doing a briefing, and the question was on natural gas, and it's like, well, what is it for? And it was basically natural gas 101. And I have to remind everybody, there's 6,000 consumer products that use natural gas or as a baseline ingredient. Everything from the ibuprofen that I took this morning to my performance T-shirt that I was wearing at the gym, to what my electricity is being generated right here on Capitol Hill from the Capitol Hill power plant. It is, the markets are there, they are expanding. And every time I do a Chat GPT or a Grok search, I'm using 10 times the amount of computing power, which means as a regular Google search. And the result of that is that there's a far more greater demand for energy. Yeah. I know that doesn't answer your question, but I do think we are going through this natural gas renaissance. And it's being driven not by the oil and gas industry, but by the end users of it, particularly data, which is kind of cool to have them be doing our marketing for us.
Yeah, I really met that Capitol Hill power plant. When I first started working out in DC occasionally, this was in the mid-90s, it was a coal plant, right?
Yeah, coal plant.
And then we had all the hysteria about climate change and Al Gore and pollution. And then they could have converted all that to wind and solar if they'd wanted to, but they converted it to natural gas instead, because that was something that was going to supply power for 24 hours a day, which they kind of need on Capitol Hill.
Yeah.
So one other thing the One Big Beautiful Bill Act did was repeal a lot of stuff in the Inflation Reduction Act, most notably for this discussion, that new tax on natural gas that was stuck in, or I guess they call it a fee.
Yeah.
That was stuck into the Inflation Reduction Act. And how important was that in terms of a goal for you and your members?
It was huge, particularly for the smaller members, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And the way that thing was put together, I remember you and I sort of complaining about this 4 years ago, which was, that methane fee was a fee that was implemented and then started under the Inflation Reduction Act bill, which levied on primarily small consumers. And then the regulatory structure was, you will start paying the fee, and that fee will increase. And while that fee is increasing, while you're paying it, we're going to build the actual regulatory mechanism around it to tell you why you're paying the fee. That fee was in place 3 years before the final rule came out from under the Biden administration. And the fact of the matter is that somewhat survived the bird bath. It was kind of we wanted a straight repeal, and the parliamentarian ruled against that. But she said if you push it outside the 10-year window, then it meets the bird bath. But more than anything, that is a fundamental sense of fairness, which is if I'm a small producer and I've got infrastructure around, I've got rigs on the ground, so to speak, and you're charging me a fee without telling me how or why I can come in compliance, so I don't have to pay the fee. You just keep telling me that I have to pay it until you tell me that I don't. That's not fair. And that was actually really important for the small producers. It was an indirect tax on consumers.
Yeah.
And it didn't necessarily spur the technological innovation that the Biden administration and the authors of the IRA said that it would. It was just a matter of, all right, I'm going to have to pay this, and I'm going to wait and see. So that was a big deal, I think, particularly for the small producers. The stripper wells, for example,
right.
Probably those guys were probably the most impacted by that. And so that was a big win for us. We had some pretty big wins in this bill, to be honest with you, that we don't like to trumpet too much, but we had some pretty big wins. We don't want to make ourselves a target, so to speak. So.
Exactly. Yeah. And people don't pay enough attention to the stripper well question, because it's like 8 to 10% of our total supply comes from stripper wells.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, if you implement these policies that are going to put those little guys out of business, you're going to have a supply issue pretty quick. And
exactly. You combine that with and the whole purpose, if you think about how they crafted this 4 years ago, not that we have to be talking about what happened 4 years ago versus four days ago, but it was really interesting. That whole Inflation Reduction Act bill was designed primarily not to reduce inflation, but on the energy side was to either reduce the production and or consumption of fossil fuels, fossil energy. And so stripper wells, for a good example, they threw billions of dollars into orphan abandoned wells, where actually the amount of money they put into the orphan abandoned well reclamation programs available probably far exceeded the number of orphan abandoned wells that were available at the time, but it was built in anticipation of shutting down the stripper wells and making them uneconomical. So if you take 10%, like you say, 10% of the stripper well production offline, and you add to that, for all intents and purposes, the onshore and offshore federal portfolio, which is 25%, they almost got halfway there just from that one bill of shutting down probably 40% of production in the United States. And that, for a while, that put intense pressure on the private and the state lands and even the tribal lands to bring new production online. Yeah. Again, all of that's changed because those provisions have been returned back to normal, which is great. And I think we're off to a good start where we're at right now.
Yeah, and returning to normal order, you mentioned offshore, the return to normal leaf sales that are required under the law, that the Biden administration just ignored and refused to hold, is going to be huge for the offshore industry. I mean, this first lease sale they're already planning is going to encompass almost the whole Gulf of Mexico. It's crazy. It's really a bold step, I think.
It is. The capture rate on those offshore lease developments, so as you know, 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
And we've got sort of a donut hole that exists right now going back 15 years ago from the Obama administration when they slowed walk things. But you're exactly right. This companies need to have options. The super majors need to have an option, be it onshore or offshore. And the small independent producers need to have options if they're a New Mexico or a Texas operator to have some of their production on federal lands. And I think, again, what this bill does is it provides the options and provides the certainty that we all have been needing for the last 4 years.
Yeah, we've got a good question from one of our viewers. Do the U.S. Oil and Gas Association members anticipate sustainability reports to be phased out? Cost of capital with this big, beautiful bill to drop. ESG financiers in the major banks have inflated the cost of capital around the world. I don't know about that last statement, but I mean, are your members anticipating not having to do the sustainability reports in the near future?
Yeah, and the reason why is it's been fascinating. Some of the compliance reports that we do, a company will spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in preparation and submitting, and nobody actually ever reads them.
Right.
This goes with the disruptor sort of nature of this administration across the board, be it at EPA or Interior or Treasury or what have you, which is we don't care about sustaining and extending and perpetuating the process. We want a result. And if we can cut 80% of the process out and produce a result, that's what we want to do.
Yeah.
It's been really interesting, the conversation. That's a great question. I'm glad they asked that. Conversation about how do we streamline federal permitting and APDs, for example. We've had some AI companies come in and present to Interior saying we can cut 80% of the APD process out just by using a certain type of AI, which has taken the federal the BLM permit process itself and incorporated EPA requirements and individual state requirements on top of that, and actually built the AI specific, not using Chat GPT, but the specific AI, and producing an 80% expedited process. That's going to be great. And that's going to help for reporting and everything else. So I do think we're moving into a very disruptive time. It's going to be big, and it's going to be beautiful, and it's necessary.
Yeah, just a little anecdote. I'm one of those nerds that logs into investor presentations from time to time from some of the big companies. And 3-4 years ago, a company like Exxon or Chevron, and more so Shell and BP, would have spent 15 minutes talking about ESG and their sustainability reports and those things. And I listened to Exxon's first investor call of the year this year, and they didn't even talk about it, didn't even address it. I mean, it's just not a topic of conversation. Larry Fink at BlackRock, I mean, you really want to have a real example Larry Fink at BlackRock didn't mention ESG in his last earnings call, which is extraordinary because 2 years ago it would have been half the call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They still sort of, with all due respect, sort of bastardized the process,
Yeah.
And it's nice to see, again, in an era of cheap money, you can afford to a virtue signal like that, but the return to profitability is key, I think, right now. And that's why these people like, if it's not profitable, I'm not interested.
Right. And that's why you see what's happening at BP happening and why Shell is de-emphasizing wind and solar investments.
Yeah.
You can just go down the list of the big companies that are, dedicating a lot more capital to their core business functions.
That's what's so fascinating to me, David, is, 4 years ago, this goes to sort of the trade association dynamic in DC. We said to our members, and we said to the fellow trades, look, appeasement is not a winning strategy. You will not win by coming in and trying to parrot what they say back to you.
Yeah.
And those companies that tried to take that, they clearly did not get their return on investment for appeasement that they thought that they would. So I think from my perspective, that's one of the right calls we made at the U.S. Oil and Gas Association, is we're going to fight back. We're not going to pretend that gas stoves are polluting and giving children, giving children asthma, that's crap, and things like that. So,
well, it was the right decision. It's a decision that should have happened 30 years ago. But I mean, the industry's always tried to go along to get along with these things. I mean, I went to work for Shell 20 years ago. It's been 20 years ago this year. And, they were already building an ESG, a whole department of ESG kinds of people, sustainability people. But that was 10 years before the term ESG was even invented. Right.
Yeah.
And so, we've taken this posture in the industry. Well, if we just appease these people, it's kind of the Neville Chamberlain approach.
Yeah.
We were in for 30 years, just trying to appease and go along. And it takes a little bit of our profitability away, but we can deal with it. And we're doing a lot of these things anyway, so we might as well talk about it.
Yeah.
But it just doesn't work. And I think the Biden administration, the one blessing from the Biden administration, the Inflation Reduction Act, is it kind of, I think it spurred that decision to fight back. And you were one of the real leaders in that and have been for several years now. And it's why I always call you when I have questions about this stuff.
Well, it's very kind, because your audience needs to know that you are my muse, and whenever I need a question, I call you back. So, so
you're the one I can rely to call me back.
Yeah, it's feeling beautiful. It's the Mutual Admiration Society here.
Yes, it is, and for sure. And we're running up against time. One last question, though. I pointed out in the last Daily Caller piece I wrote that we're just 6 months into the Trump administration, 42 months to go. It's entirely possible that we're going to get to the end of 2028, and it will be almost as if the Biden administration never happened where energy policy is concerned. Do you share that, or is that an overstatement?
No, I hope so. I really do hope so. The pendulum swings, obviously, and who knows what goes into the midterm election. But I do think that people have really sort of come to the realization that they need what we offer from the oil and gas perspective. They cannot live day to day without us, and the transition is going to be long. It's going to be generational. It's going to be generations before we transition away. So let's keep providing cheap and affordable energy and reliable energy to people, and let's take our time in figuring out what the next generations are going to have the opportunities to do. Yeah. I think 2020, like I do think, with all due respect to the prior administration, the more forgettable they become, the better off we all are. It really is. It was. We're gonna look back and go, "What the hell were we thinking?"
Oh, I know. It's like a bad dream.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I used to wake up every single morning and wonder what bad thing was going to happen to our industry today, and it was literally every 3 days they'd announce one other thing. Yeah. And the fact that we're still around goes to show how resilient we actually are, and that's been a great blessing for America, I think.
It is an incredibly resilient industry. It always has been. It's always been based in science and technology, and companies run by really smart people, and associations run by really smart guys like you. And we really appreciate you, and wish you the best of luck going forward.
No, it was great being with you. That was fun. Let's keep doing this. Okay.
Absolutely. And thanks everybody for joining. Appreciate you as well. And we'll be back soon with another episode of Energy Impacts with yours truly, David Blackman. Thank you.